Welcome everybody to another evening, one of our monthly programs of the Rhinebeck Historical Society. Before I introduce this evening's speaker, you may have noticed that the setup in the room is a little bit different than usual. We have some artifacts from the Civil War that have been brought here by the reenactors of the 150th New York Volunteer Infantry Regiment, and we have a couple of representatives of that regiment who will be, I'll introduce after our talk this evening. And there also are some artifacts up front here that Duane may be referring to in the course of her presentation. The origin of this evening's talk was a phone call from somebody named Brenda Furlong, who lives in Albany. And Brenda is the great-great-granddaughter of someone who served in the Civil War. She called us here at the Rhinebeck Historical Society because she was on her way to a Civil War museum in Pennsylvania to donate a collection of Civil War letters and diaries, but among this collection, she told us she had something that pertained to Rhinebeck, and that it was a deed for a house on Livingston Street, and would we be interested in that? I said, sure, 1864 deed, that sounds fascinating. We'd love to see that. I said, by the way, what's the name of the property owner? And she said, well, it says Robert Hevenor. I said, wow, you know, we had a Civil War soldier from Rhinebeck by the name of Benjamin Hevenor. This wouldn't have been a relative by any chance. And it got to be a conversation about our Civil War heritage here in Rhinebeck and people who had served. So she came down here to donate the deed, and she said, you know, my husband and I talked about this, and we decided that we're not going to go to Pennsylvania. We want to donate this entire collection to you guys. You seem very interested and knowledgeable about this Civil War veteran, and he was the son of the person mentioned in this property deed. And so we had these. This was a little over 3 years ago that she came down here. And then a few weeks later, we had a volunteer here by the name of Jeffrey Anteville. He's a retired reporter for the Reuters, AP, UPI, who was based in Washington and London and retired here to Rhinebeck, and came by, as many of our volunteers do, asking what kind of material did we have that might be of interest for him to work on. I said, well, you know, somebody donated a bunch of Civil War letters not too long ago, and we'd like to have them scanned and ideally have somebody write something about them. Well, he not only scanned all of them, but he also wrote an article that on Memorial Day, 3 years ago, appeared on the front page of the Poughkeepsie Journal. And it was a brilliant article. Jeffrey is a very quick study and able to put together quite an effective story about Benjamin Hevenor. But the collection still needed to be studied in considerably more detail. And the person who's done that is our speaker this evening. Duane Ragucci is a retired, well, she taught school for a good number of years, was the principal of the Beekman Elementary School in the Arlington School District, and moved here to Rhinebeck with her husband Al, who's somewhere out there in the audience. There he is, a few years ago. And instead of my continuing to talk, I think you need to hear from Duane.
Oh, thank you. This has been a real pleasure to work on this project. The letters and the diary give us such a great idea of what life was like in Rhinebeck, what life was like for Benjamin as he in his day-to-day activities during the Civil War. I learned so much about him. I learned about his family. It got to be very personal after a while. I felt like I was married to him. What's Ben doing today? And but it was lovely. And I think when you get a chance, you can see a lot of this online. And I am going to take you on a journey. It's a 3-year journey in a little less than an hour. So strap on your seatbelts. We're going, and we're going fast. But I want to highlight the things that I think you'll enjoy learning about Benjamin's experience in the Civil War. The one thing I did learn is he was a great guy, and just his writing, I felt like he was a nice man. He cared about citizenship, he cared about doing right, he was very religious, he cared about his family a lot, and he was pretty thrifty. So I think hopefully you'll see those things as I share some of his writings. And this is his story. This is not me interpreting, I'm telling you exactly what he said, and I think you'll see that as we go through these slides. The one thing I didn't see in his diary is any mention of fear. He never mentioned he was afraid, or he didn't think he could do it, or he was pretty confident and very sure of what they were doing, and very much sure of what the cause was, and he stressed that often in his writing. So let's begin our journey. He was born in Rhinebeck, August 20th, in 1838. His parents were Robert and Hevenor, and his mother was Lucy Hyam. And there were 4 boys in the family and 2 girls. They had Reuben Macy, Matthias Van Leeuwen, and Winfield Scott. Yeah, very big names. The girls were Pauline and Margaret. That's all I got. But Reuben, Matthias, and Benjamin all served in the Civil War. Reuben and Benjamin returned, Matthias did not. And he is buried in the Rhinebeck Cemetery. So his grave is there. Benjamin worked as a blacksmith and a tool maker before he entered service. And when he joined Company K, he was 24 years old. And that was on September 6th, 1862. So just briefly, and I have all these official reenactors here that make me a little nervous. I hope I have it right, but tell me later, okay? He started, actually Colonel Ketchum began recruiting in August of '62, and that's when Benjamin joined. In October '62, the 150th left for Baltimore, Maryland. June of 1863, with the band playing and flags flying, they marched out of their winter camp to join the Grand Old Army in the Battle of Gettysburg. In September of '63, they went to Tennessee, and they were stationed there along railroad, protecting it and probably making sure that supply lines were running. In 1864, April 1864, they became part of Sherman's campaign. Atlanta campaign. In November, they became part of Sherman's March to the Sea in 1864. And after that, they did have another campaign, their last campaign, which was going home. Let's see, where am I? So they settled in at Camp Belger, which was outside Baltimore, Maryland, doing guard duty and providing having daily drills. He talks about drills endlessly, every day. Rose at 4:30, drilled, formal drill, went to bed, got up, drilled, and he does this repeatedly. This is the first entry he made in his diary, and it says B.J. Hevenor, his diary, October 21st, 1862. And I'm going to just go to the next one because that is the actual entry that you see to the right. And this day I commenced to keep a diary of events that transpired daily while I'm in the service of the United States. Rose at 4:30. Company drill, battalion drill, dress parade, of whole brigade review by General Emery. Brigade consisted of 128th, 150th, 110th, and the 6th New York Artillery. That lasted 6 hours. And he did this day in and day out. Oops, gotta keep up with myself. And this is a picture of Camp Belger. When you get a chance after, there is a map of the same picture on the table. It is fascinating. All the different regiments are identified on the map. It gives a real understanding of what kind of environment they were living in. And if you notice in the bottom right, there are some women and looks like small children there. They often came to watch and see what was going on. And I think this probably, if I'm not mistaken, is a formal drill, right? Your dress parade. Thank you. Oh, good. Got it right. Just got to make sure. So daily life was pretty much, like I said, it was drill and more drill. October 22nd, went to W. Smith's tent and sang several hymns, read 3rd, 4th, and 5th chapters of John. He was a religious man, and he spent a lot of time on Sundays finding places to go to church. October 24th sent money home. That was important to him too, getting money home to his family. I love this next one. 25th, went to the creek, washed my person well over. I was timid about bathing. He was just a nice guy. The 26th, secured a pass to the city to visit Reverend Macron, and after sermon, accepted a dinner invitation. In his writing, I'm giving you brief snippets just to give you an idea of who he was. He talks about what they ate and who they talked to, and it was very informative. October 29th, the regiment received marching orders. Knapsacks packed, canteen filled, ammunitions dealt out. 8 p.m. news came to get into ranks and march into city. Great excitement. Soon orders came, break ranks. He talks about this, or mentions this repeatedly, because they're often told to get ready, get your stuff together, get out there, and then they're told to go back. It must be quite disappointing when you're preparing for battle. Thanksgiving, passed to city to hear Macron preach. 26, I love this, escorted 20 prisoners to Lieutenant Colonel quarters. Offense, intoxication. I guess they had to relieve themselves in some way. How surprising it is that most of the disobedience occurs when those who are under the influence of intoxication. God grant to shield me from the temptation which surrounds me, make me one to be the example. December 14th, prayer service. Went to my tent, convinced that if I would become a sincere child of Christ, I must not fear to own him before men. I resolved that, let others do as they would, I should endeavor to do my duty. This is where you can see how important home was to him. Expected to receive a letter from home, but very disappointed. I shall write and inform them that henceforth they need not expect to hear from me until I shall have received an answer from mine. And I think Mike and David and the rest of us that work in here will agree that being disappointed about letters was frequently an issue, and also from his family. The next one, whoops, expected to receive a box from home, but was doomed to disappointment. Again, received marching orders. But this time, he says, I gave no credit, heard plenty of such talk before. I was told we'd been given orders. Hastened to comply. 40 pounds of cartridges, a battalion line at 4 o'clock. We did march to Washington Depot. Destination unknown, concluded Harper's Ferry. Our objective, intercept rebel raids. Now the next slide I'm kind of sticking in here. It is not from Benjamin, it's not from his family, but it is sequentially a letter that was in the pile of letters that we got. We don't know where it came from, but it's fascinating. It is a letter from a Confederate soldier, and it's a letter that he wrote to his family. Camp Dumfries, expecting a fight here every day. The Yanks is advancing down the river. They come at about 100 yards every day. We're low on provisions on account of having to haul it in wagons. The roads are awful. They would bog a duck. It's amazing how they wrote things. Mr. Whitaker, read this to Mother. Tell her I am enjoying the best of health and as fat as a bar. Tell her to make me some pants and send anything that I have. To buy, I paid $25 for a suit of clothes. They don't often pay in these parts. They're 4 months behind. Please write. I'm 490 miles from any place. Edwin Sanders. I found that fascinating because there were two sides to this horrible war, but it was nice to see that in there, and as I said, we're not sure how it got there. But Camp Dumfries is located in Virginia on the Potomac River.
The letter is written 8 months prior to the Mustang.
Here's where he's starting to talk about some of the issues surrounding the Civil War. Attended a debate. The subject resolved that 'tis the policy of the government to arm the Negro to help in suppressing the rebellion. The question was well handled, both on the part of the affirmative and negative. Meeting adjourned to meet again tomorrow evening to resume the question. So they did have these intellectual discussions, but he never refers to that again in the next entry in his diary. Our company's detailed to do duty as guard at National Hospital in Baltimore. Received a box from home, pair of boots, too small, a scarf for Mary. Sergeants and lieutenants, when we first came to this place, took the liberty to stray from quarters and when returned were intoxicated. What an example this is to set before those who are under their charge. As I said, he's a good guy. Received a visit from 2 Rhinebeck men, John Drury, whose name we'll hear again later, and James Fellows. I'm not sure if you know any of those names from town, but well, Drury is a pretty big name. Visited the Union Relief, where I saw about 100 of the rebel Negro guerrillas, no 2 being uniformed alike. Many express regret of their becoming such and are thankful that they are now placed in a situation in which they would not be hindered in taking the oath in support of our government. The greatest internal problem during the war was the care and disposition of, as they referred to it, the Negroes, and the aid and relief societies were formed to help them. Now there's a gap in the diary from May 1860, whoops, got one more. Returned to Camp Belger after 7 weeks of guard duty at National Hospital in Baltimore. A letter from Maggie. Rube is still in Vicksburg. He's going to make application for his discharge on account of his eyes. So that is his brother Reuben that does return home. And it is because he has an issue with his eyes. And on another day when I can tell another story, we'll know that Ben has an issue with his eyes also. But there is a gap in the diary, but we know that the company left Camp Belger and they joined the Army of the Potomac. They fought in the Battle of Gettysburg from the 1st through the 3rd, and it was a bloody and brutal battle. Right, guys? Yes, sure. And there is he does not have anything in his diary about that period of time, but there is a letter to his family dated June 28, 1863, days before their Gettysburg engagement. I don't know how you could be in such an intense situation and write what he writes. On the move, left Baltimore, too exhausted to pitch tents, but before morning commenced to rain. Each person carries half a tent of twilled muslin, 6 feet square. They button together, and you can erect hundreds of these together. Heavy forces as far as eyes can scan, one beholds encampment of the army. Remember me in your prayers to the throne of grace, that God may be my support in my trying hour. So that's all I have about what happened to him when he was in Gettysburg, or during that time. But I found it pretty fascinating how they created their tent cities, I would call them. So after Gettysburg, I'm skipping that because I don't have anything to share that he directly wrote, they did travel, the 150th traveled to Tennessee. And in the spring, 1864, he's with his regiment in Tennessee, and they begin moving toward Georgia to join Sherman in his Atlanta campaign. The title says, Benjamin's Movement, and underneath, during Sherman's march to Atlanta. So let's see what happened to him. First, he goes to Nickajack, Tennessee. And I'm saying he, but I mean the whole 150th, or most of them. They go to Nickajack, Tennessee. He writes, I'm sick and riding in an ambulance to Nickajack. We camped near a cave entrance in Shelmond, Tennessee. It's used by Rebs to manufacture saltpeter. Now, saltpeter is made up of potassium nitrate, which was used for making gunpowder. So he talked about his experience at that cave. Then they went to Ringgold, and he writes, March to Ringgold. Indications of heavy engagements, laid over, washed clothes. Then he went to Dalton. Stayed in Dalton a few days, witnessed booming of cannons and passing of wounded troops from field of conflict. The 150th is being held in reserve. Rumors that Grant has whipped Lee in Virginia, I trust, will be confirmed. Well, we know this was premature because it happened almost a year later after the Battle of Appomattox. But my feeling is that's the first indication in 1864 of fake news. Next, they went to Snake Creek Gap. In the Snake Creek Gap, they were awakened early, moving to the front. Reached Snake Creek Gap, 3 miles from the front. Our forces are strong. Rebs are surrounded, and in order to escape, they intend to cut through the gap. Unfortunately, on May 12th, this morning, while chopping wood, the hatchet glanced, inflicting a severe wound above the ankle. Now I'm compelled to take shelter and conveyance in an ambulance. Troops are continuously passing. Our force must be very strong. So I see that you can read May 14th, Ringgold. This is Sherman's march to Atlanta, which is not up there, it's way down there. But Benjamin's time in the march to Atlanta has ended, and he's back at Ringgold. And it's due to his injury. He has to leave his boys and his people and go and recuperate. Started for Ringgold, road blocked by troops, artillery, and supply trains, past Sherman and Schofield on their way through the gap. May God, who rules the destinies of nations, grant us a complete victory over the enemies of our country, that it may be so complete as will terminate this war and unite us again. So he's back in Ringgold. At one time, this may have been a thriving town, but war has left its blight. 'Tis now chiefly used for army purposes. And this, the rest of the 150th were involved in the Battle of Resaca, which was fought May 13th through the 15th. And unfortunately, he was not part of it because of his injury. I just wanted to also share, this is a picture of the Saltpeter Cave in Shelmond, Tennessee. I just found it fascinating and wanted to give you a little idea of what it looked like. It's near Nickajack, and that's where the regiment camped. There is a little bit of folklore about the cave. It's said that Johnny Cash visited the cave in not 18, 1968, and he intended to actually commit suicide there. But he had a spiritual experience and left the cave and gave up all of his bad habits, and as we know, continued as a successful man. And this is a letter to his parents telling them about his injury. You were doubtless anxious to hear from me owing to the state of my wound. And that's when he cut his ankle with an axe. Surgeons suggested I retire to the rear to give room to more cases that could not bear transportation. Came here to Nashville last evening having left Resaca. So after this, he stays in the hospital. I think he might have been in Kentucky based on some of his letters that had that as the location where he wrote the letter. But he received a discharge from the hospital, and he writes, received discharge to be reunited with my regiment, and this was in July of 1864. July 10th, 1864, arrived in Nashville, and I quartered in Zollicoffer House. He did not send this picture to his parents or did not put it in his library, but I thought it was a fascinating picture of Zollicoffer House, which is located in Nashville, a huge, huge house, and it was used by federal troops as a barracks, as a prison, and for Confederate soldiers, and as a hospital during the Civil War. So he did more recuperating there. So after that, he reached Chattanooga, and he's detailed to take charge of police squad and also was a prison guard at a military prison. And this is where he was a prison guard, and it was at or near the Chattanooga train station. And this again is a fascinating picture. I am a prison guard, he writes in July 27th. Several hundred rebel prisoners beside many federal prisoners thrown promiscuously together, and between the two, 'twould be hard to discriminate which was the seediest set. 900 rebs sent north today. I think his writing is excellent. If any teachers in here, give him an A. August 10th, on fatigue duty, sent to National Cemetery to dig graves. Not a pleasant part of the job. And I'm going to digress again for a moment just to give you a brief background on a situation that he's going to write about next. And this refers to the Fort Pillow Massacre. Now in 1961, 1861, good thing that you're all helping me out there. In 1861, there was a military installation at the site of Fort Pillow, which was named after Johnson Pillow, Gideon Johnson Pillow. But it was captured by the federal forces in the summer of 1862. In March of 1864, Major General Nathan Bedford Forrest, he was determined to take back that Fort Pillow site, which was being, let's see, I guess there were about 600 men that were there, stationed there, and most of them, half of them were black. So on April 12th, his force, estimated to be 1,500 to 2,500, quickly overran the fort. But they were not so kind to the 600 men that were there. They killed the majority of them, and the majority of them that they did kill were black. And they refused to treat the soldiers as POWs, which really infuriated the North. The Union survivors' accounts, later supported by a federal investigation, concluded that the African American troops were massacred. The irony is, despite the ferocity of the attack, it was of little significance, and they abandoned it within hours. So, kind of a sad situation. I'm sharing that background because one of his next diary entries on August 16, 1864, he writes, news of a raid by the 14th United States Colored Troops. They charged Rebs in Dalton, Georgia, and drove them away. The Negroes gave no quarters to the captured Rebs, and when the Rebs asked why, the Negroes reminded the sufferers of Fort Pillow. A group of 5 Rebs were found in a thicket by the Negroes and kneeling begged for mercy. The petition fell on closed ears and they met death after being reminded of Fort Pillow. So that's why I gave you a little bit of background to understand why they retaliated. And this is just a drawing of an image of the Fort Pillow massacre. I just want to also mention that at this time, black soldiers were paid about $10 a month, and $3 of that 10 was deducted for clothing. The white soldiers were paid about $13 a month, and no clothing deduction. But in June of 1864, Congress granted retroactive equal pay. So he continued his time in Chattanooga, assigned to the Guard as a prison guard. August 20th, 1864, 12 o'clock a.m., received 98 Johnnies into prison, 4 officers, 1 captain, and 3 lieutenants. Does anybody remember August 20th? This is my birthday. Not my birthday, Benjamin's birthday. Today I am 26 years old. This I can hardly realize, for even now the scenes of my bygone days are living still, and time cannot blot them from my memory. It seems as if but yesterday I joined the boys in their sports on the schoolhouse green. I can just imagine Rhinebeck, he's talking about his home. What picnics were planned, what pleasure excursions on the pond. Reality says I'm 26. I do not feel so old. I feel as lighthearted and gay as in days bygone. August 24th, still in Chattanooga. Went to the country, purchased a half a bushel of peaches, took back to the city and sold at 10 cents a dozen and made $1.10. August 30th, bought a half a bushel of peaches, made $1.55. Bought a bushel of apples for $1 and made $1.55. On September 2nd, he made apple pie. Received news of possession of Atlanta. Well, it actually happened on July 22nd, so news doesn't travel too fast. I'm amazed at how this news all traveled anyway. I mean, the letters and the correspondence and the information, it is amazing. September 3rd, read the Bible. Speculated on peaches and pies and made $1.75. September 30th, left Chattanooga to join my command in Atlanta. Arrived in Atlanta September 30th. Boys are glad to see me. He's thrilled he's back with his 150th. Now he's part of Sherman's March to the Sea, and I call this Benjamin's March, but he actually does make it this time. On September 30th, he arrived in Atlanta. On October 12th, he's on the Macon Turnpike. November 15th, he's in Decatur. November 14th, Social Circle. November 19th, Madison. November 23rd, Milledgeville. December 7th, or 3rd, Millen. And December 10th, Savannah. So he did manage to make it all the way with his 150th. I just want to go back to some of the things that happened during that time. Sherman's March to the Sea was a big deal, as you know. This is a letter to his sister Pauline, dated October 25th, and it's all about foraging. And I found this fascinating. When you think of foraging, you think a bunch of, a group of people going through some field or something and capturing animals and maybe getting some vegetables or things that are growing. But it was really large, 560 wagons. They had a battery of artillery, 2 brigades of infantry, 500 cavalry. This was great fun for the boys. Walking through the fields, plucking corn, filling 50 to 100 wagons. Large quantities of cotton and cattle were captured. Sweet potatoes thrive in abundance and could not be passed up. This is the only plunder I was guilty of taking. He's such a good boy. I confess my will would have led me to the taking of other plunders, such as sheep, hogs, and chickens, but I could not resist the appeals of women and children. With wagons filled, we returned to Atlanta. Our next expedition had 700 wagons. So this foraging was huge. I mean, just, a lot. This next slide will show you just a graphic of, not a very good one, but this was a foraging graphic that I did find. October 13th, 1864, enclosed my ballot in an envelope, which is to be taken to the county seat by the colonel. And this is the ballot what do they call it, absentee ballot for the election of the next president. And he does support, in his letters to his family, he's supporting Lincoln and asking them all to support him. Whoops, better go over there. Here's a letter to his mother, visiting the north part of town, and he's talking about visiting Atlanta. And this was after it had been pretty much destroyed. The part in which the principal foundry of the Confederacy was standing, but which is now one vast ruin. Its machinery and boilers are entangled and ruined locomotive cars and things connected with the railroad. A large quantity of shot, shell, and missiles of all kinds, and a number of muskets and firearms have been seen. Heavy loss to the Confederate. He mentions the upcoming election in his closing. A genuine Republican vote for Old Abe for the prosecution of the war until every Reb lays down his arms and the sympathizers, the copperheads, will shrink away before the gaze of honest people. I remain your affectionate son, Ben Hevenor. Now that's a closing if I ever heard one. Now, as if the war wasn't enough for this young man to contend with, his thoughts at home are very evident in his next letter. This was sent to his father. I was about closing a letter to Pauline, but before closing I read the Rhinebeck paper. And this is what he read. Advertisement for property which is for sale. Get some person to take up the mortgage for you. I don't want the property to pass entirely from your hand. Retain hold you have until I return home. I will redeem it in time from the mortgage. I will work day and night to accomplish. So here's this poor young guy battling, and he's on Sherman's march to the sea, and he finds out that his family's losing its home, and they do lose their home. The home was located at 12 Livingston Street. Some of you may know which house that is. And actually, Michael told me that
Nick McCausel.
he was an owner, maybe the most recent owner of that home, and he was president of the Historical Society, correct? So that's a real connection there. November 6th, orders came to pack up. Not sure where we were going, but we have enough rations for 100 days. Went nowhere. November 8th, today the people of this nation has cast their suffrages for the choice of the candidate who will for the next 4 years represent the nation as its chief magistrate. And as we know, this was the day that Lincoln won the election, and he was obviously very happy. November 11th, went into Atlanta, saw the destruction of the depot and engine house. Troops are tearing up railroads. They will never be of use. November 13th, sent to destroy railroad tracks, heating and warping the rails. We engaged in wrecking the rails until 9 p.m. We destroyed about a mile of track. This is the destruction of the railroad tracks. And as you may know, it was a very strategic move for Sherman, because he thought that would definitely cut down any lines of transportation or goods being given to the Confederates. And this activity became known as Sherman's neckties. The rails were about 30 feet long, and they weighed about 500 pounds. The soldiers would pile the cross ties and place the rails on top. The cross ties were then set on fire. And when the rails were hot enough, they would put about 6 men on each end. They'd carry a rail to a tree and wrap it around the tree, making it unsalvageable. November 19th. Slaves are following our army in large numbers. They think this is day of their deliverance from bondage. One said we were doing just as we said we should, that we would march through the state destroying everything. Said he had long looked for the fulfillment of our threat and the happiest day of his life in witnessing the march of the Union Army. The country abounds in forage, sweet potatoes, molasses. We've marched 75 miles, 15 miles a day, destroying several hundred bales of cotton, much railroad, and many government buildings. He adds, people don't like our movement. They're bitterly opposed to us and very demonstrable in their language. He's such a good boy. He's such a nice man. December 10th, we struck Charleston, the Savannah Railroad. We're in the vicinity of Savannah. We met with opposition, the Johnnies disputing our further advance. December 11th, saw a steamer plying the river. When opposite the company we fired, driving the pilot in hands below deck, leaving boat to take its own course. It ran up on a sandbar. Rebel colonel and 10 men captured. The steamer was set on fire. December 14th, news received of capture of Fort McAllister. Our fleet moved up harbor. The Cracker Line is reported open. Oh, I forgot to show you that great shot. More railroad destruction. December 1864, they're on Argyle Island, which is a little bit the island that's north and to the right of where Savannah is. There was a huge rice plantation there, and they were asked to go there and kind of destroy it. He actually indicates our brigade took possession of Argyle Island, and in this letter he sent a piece of rice home. I didn't find the rice, but he said he sent it, so I have to assume he did. It was on Argyle Island that General Ketchum received his life-threatening wound. He got a bullet in his thigh. The doctor wanted to amputate, but he said no. He said he'd rather die than have his leg removed. He never regained the, never returned to the company or to the 150th because of that injury, but he did not die. So I guess it was a good decision. I'm sure he would have rather been fighting though. December 23rd, the Rebs fled Savannah, leaving everything. The brigade has finally crossed the river by noon and marched to the city. This is the letter he sent home to his family. I thought this was kind of interesting. He's talking, telling them all about his activity at Argyle Island, and he mentions Lieutenant Steenberg, who we talked about, I've talked to some of you about. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. I've written twice before the fall of the city, to neither of which I haven't received a reply. We were sent to take possession of rice mills and prevent Rebs' access to rice on Argyle Island. On South Carolina's soil was a fever of Rebs who opened on us with a shower of shot and shell. The brigade remained on the island 2 days under the cover of heavy fog. We crossed the Carolina shore and commenced skirmishing the Rebs. The rest of the 150th did go to Savannah, but Ben's company was not involved. And he writes, our captain, Lieutenant Steenberg, is an old fogey. It is sure to get the company doing the dirty work. We cut and bundled reeds. After laying timbers across the canal, bundles were used in place of planking to facilitate movement of troops. Had the Rebs not surrendered the city, send 2 cotton-colored handkerchiefs immediately. That's quite a character. And this was actually, they're building corduroy roads, which was another important piece of construction during the Civil War. This is actually more of a sophisticated corduroy road, which would use planking instead of reeds. But on Argyle Island, it was swampy, so the reeds were sufficient. But old fogey Lieutenant Steenberg made them build that instead of going into Savannah. Let's see. We're getting to the next campaign that he's involved in, and I call this the final campaign. It does not start from the top going to the bottom. This instead will start at the bottom going to the top. And this is his final march home, which I'm sure he's very happy about, as well as the rest of the men. Reached Robertsville, South Carolina, skirmishes with Rebs. That was on January 29th. January 8th, passed through Grahamville Station. Large quantities of cotton captured will be burned. Tore up tracks between Branchville and Augusta. February 16th, en road to Columbia, South Carolina, cannon heard in the distance, received intelligence of Columbia's capture. Have seen very few plantations or houses. The Rebs more destructive of property than Yanks. Rebs have taken everything they possess. The people are turning from the Rebs in disgust and fly for safety to the Army of the Union. February 20th, near Winnsboro. No troops allowed to pass through except the 3rd Division and our own. We marched at attention. The reason? Due to the disgraceful scenes that occurred in Columbia when taken possession by the 15th and 17th Corps. So evidently the 15th and 17th took Columbia, and the residents of Columbia gave them, what do you think, alcohol, and hoping that they would be treated nicely for doing that. And instead they got very rowdy, and they were very bad. So I guess the powers that be said, when you go through a town, you're going to march, and march proudly. So that's what they did in Winnsboro. March 9th, crossed the Lombard River, forded several streams. Worst weather, mud is deep high, thigh deep. Soaked completely, men disheartened, difficult inducing them to corduroy. March 12th, near Fayetteville. Learned bummers took the place. March 13th, marched in review before Sherman in Slocum. March 16th, we advanced in line of battle. Heavy firing, lasted 3 hours. March 23rd, met up with the 24th and 25th Corps, part of which were first Negro troops we have seen. We witnessed their discipline and drill, both efficient not to be surpassed by their white brothers in arms. They are under command of white officers. Unfortunately, April 25th, he heard. April 17th, received the sad intelligence of the assassination of the president. This is a great loss to the country, but out of this great calamity, God may have some wise purpose. May God bless the successor. Give him wisdom that he may pursueth the right course. It's amazing we have all this stuff documented like this. April 26th, rumors of General Joseph Johnson surrender to Sherman. April 27th, loading wagons, preparing to leave for home. May 3rd, in Emporia, Virginia. May 6th, learned that Booth, the assassinator of Lincoln, had been shot, having previously been asked to surrender, but refusing to do so, he was thus dealt with. May 11th, marched through Richmond. Large portion of the city is burnt, set afire by Reb officials upon evacuation. The city presents a very lively appearance, as Northern Enterprise is already at work here. The vessels are arriving at the port daily from northern states. May 15th, Spotsylvania, Virginia. We visited the battlefield, and this was where Sherman and Lee began a battle on May 10th. We witnessed the awfulest sight I ever beheld. All along the works are skeletons of the brave that fell in the cause of the Union. Also, large numbers of Rebs that are still unburied. Many have had earth just scattered over them. Large number of partly burnt. Knapsacks, blankets, canteens, and accoutrements were scattered everywhere. May 19th, encamped near Alexandria, Virginia. May 24th, reviewed by the President and other high dignitaries of the nation. That's all he says. And this was a huge event. A huge event. Just to give you an idea, this was the grand review that you may have seen in the beginning. They indicated that the 150th brushed, mended, washed their mud-splattered, tattered, and for some bullet-pierced uniforms in the Potomac, polished their buttons, blackened what was left of their shoes, burnished their leather straps, and cleaned and polished their cartridge boxes, rifles, and bayonets until they glistened. At midnight, they had breakfast because they had a long march into Washington. At 9 a.m., while church clocks chimed and artillery piece was fired, Sherman's 60,000 men, accompanied by 14 artillery batteries, uncoiled from around the Capitol like a giant 15-mile-long python. The crowds had cheered and wept for more than 6 hours that it took Sherman and his army to march through Washington. Sherman bid his troops farewell. As in war, he said, "You have been good soldiers, so in peace you will be good citizens." June 17th, 10 a.m. this morning, the 150th Regiment is mustered out. Ben's last diary entry, he wrote to his brother Win, and he said, "Win, requesting and please join me and meet me at the Poughkeepsie Station." His last 2 words, "with funds." Oh, there's the Grand Parade. And it took 2 days for this parade. It was just an unbelievable occurrence. Benjamin ended up marrying Lucy Hyam. They had 10 children. Guess he was making up for the 3 years he wasn't home. And these are pictures of Ben. That's a picture of him, obviously, on top, and on the bottom, Ben and some of his children. His wife is not in that picture. He returned to his profession, working in the blacksmith shop and tool making. He retired in 1924 at age 86, and he died at age 98.
Wow.
He's buried in Albany. So I had a wonderful time learning about him, and I did a quick read-through of his diary over a 3-year period and hopefully highlighted some of the best parts. And what I'd like to do right now is give our 150th official reenactors a chance to share some of the things up here. And when you do get a chance to come up, we have one of Ben's letters up here for you to see. His 2 diaries that are also on the table. Please don't touch them. They're old. I don't even touch them. I look at scanned material. And a book on the 150th. The one standing up is an original, and the one laying down is a copy, so you can look at it. And let me just turn this over to
Yeah,
Mark.
let me introduce it's Mark Russell here on my left and Pete Bedrosian on my right, our reenactors with the 150th. And I wanted to give them a moment to, more than a moment, to just talk about why they're involved with the 150th and to tell us a little bit about what's on display here.
Realistic.
And they never let you out.
Never let me out. No. Haven't got a point yet. A World War II comment. If you can't, you're not pointing, you can go home. We didn't get enough points yet.
No, not at all.
So yeah, basically, yeah, we've been doing this. I've been doing this since 1992.
2000.
So it's local history. We keep the history alive. It's here. I mean, the county does have a rich history as far as American history is concerned, military history is concerned. Dutchess County was fairly unique in that the 150th was a single county regiment. Mostly companies were drawn together to a camp of rendezvous and then forming a regiment. So you might have 2 companies from Dutchess, 2 companies from Ulster, and so forth. But the decision was made to come in out of the draft, as the draft was coming. And so the recruitment of the 150th, following the 128th actually, earlier in the summer of 1862, was designed to have a regiment wholly inclusive of Dutchess County men. As a matter of fact, Company B was actually from the 128th.
Correct.
And then they were, to even out the numbers.
We referenced the 128th because of their 1,000 men, 600 of them came from Dutchess, the other 400 from Columbia, and my great-great-grandfather was Company A, the 128th. And if you read the regimental, they had quite a party when the 150th reached Baltimore. They happened to be in an empty camp that was the 128th, and they came back from Gettysburg. And they, as I said, it was a wild party. They couldn't control it, so they just hoped to contain it. So,
When the Historical Society put together a program to remember Gettysburg, in front of the post office a few years ago, the 150th anniversary of that battle. We had representatives of the 150th there. In fact, we also had a representative of the Zouaves, who's not in uniform today, but over here in the front row.
You have to sing this one song anyway.
There you go.
Yeah, Mark and I represent two parts of the 150th. Mark has a state jacket on, which was, you see the earlier portrait of Benjamin. The early jacket they got was a state jacket. They went into a lovely frock coat, which would have been a gentleman's coat, but the Army had as a dress coat, the frock coat. It's a fitted coat. It's miserable in warm weather. But the men apparently loved them. And Mark has a likeness of Ira Fish, done by Jim Shockley for a photograph. The men liked the frock coats. But the practical garment was the sack coat, which is what I'm wearing. And Mark has a forage cap on. I have a slouch hat. For good reason, my ears, my nose don't get sunburned. The water doesn't run down the back of my shirt. And because the 150th, they started the Army of the Potomac, and then when they transferred to Tennessee in the fall of 1863, in the wintertime, the decision was made to combine the 11th and 12th Army Corps into the reconstituted 20th Army Corps. The 12th Corps had a 5-pointed star as its corps badge. Why? You guy in the blue suit, you belong to me. No, I don't, sir. How do you tell them apart? So corps badges became developed to do that. And in case you couldn't count 1, 2, and 3, and you weren't colorblind, the divisions of a regiment of 3 divisions, red, white, and blue, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. So any general coming by would know that we're the 1st Division of the 20th Army Corps. So any Army Corps, you became quite proud of your corps badge. Matter of fact, in the collections, W.R. Smalley was a color bearer of the 150th. He has a sterling silver one with his name under his 5-pointed star. But the star is a way of recognizing, to whom we belong in the Army. We may be under Colonel Ketchum's boys, but in the end of the day, it's Pop Williams who gives us the commands. So that's why we have our slouch hats. Both of us have our cartridge boxes on our waist belts. The Army gave you a lovely sling with a brass eagle, which set right over your heart. What a convenience for the enemy to shoot at. So it's amazing how many of them kind of fell off. They seem to rot relatively quickly, and they went onto the waist belt. When Benjamin commented about 40 pounds of ammunition, that'd be full cartridge boxes for 10 men. A cartridge box with 40 rounds weighs 4 pounds. So that would be equal to 10 men's individual rounds for a period of time.
That's how they come packaged in 10 rounds in a package. So you can keep 20 on the top, then 2 packs underneath in the tins.
And Benjamin being a blacksmith, I'll channel Benjamin. Mark has a cleaning kit with official tools. I have unofficial tools. I was working as a blacksmith in the state of New York, and so I wanted a musket cleaning tool, clean out the vent hole, also to unscrew the things on the bands on my musket. So I forged my own musket tool. You may have known my more famous brother Leatherman. But that's my little Leatherman tool right there. It's a screwdriver and a pick. So I also made my frying pan, my knife, and my patented coffee bean crushing spoons. But each of us has probably best if everyone kind of come up and looks at our things because of the array of things that we have. We do have the world famous, hardtack. This is as good as the day it was made. And I don't eat that anymore because, well, Mark, I've been into something soft the other day. You know what it was? My tooth. I did break a tooth on a piece of hardtack. I do what the soldiers did. I have a cornmeal flour mix, and you fry this in bacon grease. Make it with water, make a little patty, fry it in bacon grease, makes a hoe cake. I do that because I don't want another crown, which I do have as a result of fighting too much hardtack. I did bring both green and roasted coffee beans and a half a pound lump of cane sugar. I might have gone to a sutler and purchased that because in 1861, the people who were supplying the Army recognized by selling ground coffee. Now I'm going to ask you a question, sir. If coffee costs me 50 cents a pound, I make a 10-cent profit. What if I put half pound of sawdust in a half pound of coffee? And so the government said, that's it, from now on you only sell whole coffee beans. Well, go to lowest bidder. This week, lowest bidder has green coffee beans. Save the extra step in the process to roast your beans before you cook them. This is a canteen half frying pan. And in honor of Benjamin, I did make a shovel frying pan. And again, oh, foraging. I brought a sweet potato, knowing he'd been on the Western Theater. And although I did not bring it in the container they would have used, I did bring a small remnant of molasses. Knowing that if you can't get sugar, this is a great supply of sugar. And it also sweetens your whole cakes and everything else you eat. I did not have any bacon to bring today, I'm sorry to say. No slab of bacon. Now you saw a picture there before, you know, of the foraging. Now Mark and I do not forage. We do not forage. When we take a hog, you see, we were obeying our superior officer, were we not?
Of course.
Because I asked that hog 3 times if he wanted to take the oath of loyalty. He didn't answer me. I had to stab him. One of the jokes in foraging is, sir, I didn't steal the chicken. He wouldn't take the oath or the hog. And they bring them back in camps. I'm so other joke.
Oh, yeah, all kinds of
All kinds of
But one of the things that in connection with the foraging, Duane didn't quote from that particular letter, but there is a place that where he comments during Sherman's march, that even though many of his fellow soldiers are foraging like crazy and destroying crops, and that he has a concern because he knows that this is that they are causing so much harm in this area of the South that he does not understand how these people will ever forgive us for what we're doing. And he several times expresses that kind of concern. It's unfortunately not just in the Civil War, but in other wars, one of the biggest problems is that the soldiers have to be fed. And how do you do that? You wind up stealing from the farmers whose land you've crossed. This is part of the reason that the Palatines wound up leaving the area of Germany that they left, because the French troops were going back and forth, and every time they'd go back and forth, they would destroy, partly to feed themselves, partly because they were angry, partly to prove they were now in charge. But it is a part of our history, and it's partly what Benjamin talks about. I didn't give anybody a chance to ask any questions.
It's okay. That's okay.
It's okay.
Is this the tent?
I have a feeling, yes, you were talking about tent sections.
So the dog tent.
Could you move into the middle?
I think we need to break out the wall.
I see the bright light at the end of the
Can we turn
tunnel.
that off?
This is a dog tent. So Mark and I would each have a half. We'd button this thing together. Unfortunately, we go this way in the tent. So, needless to say,
Something's hanging out.
some part of yours is not inside the tent, and they were not waterproofed. The World War II era tents were waxed and waterproofed. Vietnam era tents are waterproof. These are not. It's just canvas. After about 10 minutes, it's soaked. Once it gets soaked, it splats through. It just spritz through on you. But if you're in a dog tent with you're spooning with your tent mate, couple gun blankets on it over you, you can actually keep water from freezing inside this tent. You hang it on the tent pole, the water freezes. So I realize 33 degrees is not exactly a pleasant environment, but compared to being in 20 degrees, it sure as heck is.
And as was mentioned, I mean, there's buttons and buttonholes all the way around it, so you can put hundreds of them together. I'm not sure they did hundreds of them, but they would make shebangs and do different crazy things. And if you need tent poles, you just run in the woods and cut down whatever you need.
Pete and
we have to
Mark,
carry ours with us.
did offer to demonstrate the firearms, but we figured that firing those rifles might cause the local police department to get a little upset, so we passed on that.
Yeah.
But can you tell us about the guns that you have up there?
You know, each of us has a different weapon. Mark has an 1861 Springfield, I have a powder 1853 Enfield. Beginning of the war, the 150 received Lorenz Austrian muskets, which were 54 caliber and not 58, which both of ours take. England, I'll copy Mike Pete's line.
Sure.
Mike Peets, who couldn't be here tonight, says, England was an equal opportunity arms merchant, selling Enfields to both the Confederates and the Federals. It's a British-made weapon. Matter of fact, when I was at the Tower of London, I was going to ask if they'd let me have one because they have a whole room full of them. These were sighted to 900 yards. Like the Springfield, they're rifled, so their accurate range is 250 yards, and the ball will carry 1,000 yards. Half a mile, 800 yards each sense. I'm not sure.
Well, I don't even use the Springfield.
Move in the middle and more people.
I have the Springfield, but of course this is from Springfield, Massachusetts. Where the Enfields you have to unscrew to take them apart. These you just push in the. I don't even use this one, but they just slide right off.
I don't use mine either, Mark, so maybe no better off.
I don't even know if the rammer can come out. Oh, it does. Yeah, hang on to that. But they can just take these apart without a screwdriver.
Well, I had to make the screwdriver.
Only that one has the, no, there it is. I
They're
can't find them. Can't see them.
on the right side.
Well, anyway, you take them all off, then you can take the barrel off to clean them. But I feel the Enfield are a superior weapon.
I like it because it has a lovely slotted bayonet. I'm not going to lose the passion on the barrel with it when I fire it.
Well, that's just it too. My cleaning kit is for the Enfield, not the Springfield.
This is actually .577, that's 58 caliber, but they're interchangeable as far as the tolerances back in the day, so that if Mark were to fall out and be wounded, I could rifle his cartridge box and take his cartridges, or he mine. When the Lorenz's at 54 caliber, I'm out of luck. The 21st Ohio had Colt revolving rifles at Chickamauga. They were great for about 4 hours, ran out of ammo. Then they just basically just kind of toss weapons down and either find Springfields or leave the battlefield. So one of the things that comes out of the war is standardizing your weapons, because both sides began the war with a multiplicity of weapons, some 69 caliber smoothbores, some were different caliber sizes, and how do I know what you're going to need? When are you going to run out? So I don't know. So they got to the point of standardization for the weapons, and so weapons functionally are interchangeable, even though they're from across the pond into the manufacturer. Also, Springfield could not meet the demand for the rifles. They actually had subcontractors out to do Springfield work on other locations. Amoskeag up in New Hampshire, and in New Haven, there were some contractors in Connecticut that made Springfields as well. So the demand was so high. There are about 2.5 million men in service on the Union side, about 1 million men on the Confederate side. So when you consider going from an army of 15,000 people to 3 million people serving on both sides, that's a lot of demand for the weapons and things that we have.
A lot of food to feed them.
You'll notice I'm kind of raggedy on the pants here, my stocks and my drawers are showing. Pretty much by the time I got through with the Columbia Carolinas campaign, they were in tatters. My blouse looked pretty good. My shoes looked pretty good. I was going to wear my holy ones. They're too uncomfortable to wear. But by the time they ended the marches, some of them were wearing civilian clothes. When Benjamin talks about the prisoners, when you're a prisoner, then as now, I like that. Someone takes something from you. So by the time you have been a prisoner for any period of time, you may be pretty tatterdemalion. So both sides were pretty...
And you wait for someone to die and take their stuff.
Well, yeah, that's true. Yeah. So those kind of things would go on. Oh, here's talking about the weapons, cartridges. I brought up, Mark has some original mini balls on the table. I have some cleaning around with some spent mini balls. One of the things in some of the humor that are in the letters there, if you're going to be in a place for a length of time, what you might do is name your tent. So I have Reynolds Roost. I go by Reynolds when I'm in the field. Not to be Armenians floating around. One who I know is a surgeon. He got captured. Well, the other side of my lineage is the Reynolds family and the Phippses and so forth. So what I'm doing, not using Reynolds Roost, I have Hotel Terra Firma. And because Richard T. Van Wyck was a member of the 150th whose letters have been published. And at one point, apparently his mother, and when you think of Van Wyck Expressway, the wealthy Dutch family, I suspect his mother said, "And Richard, where are you staying?" He goes, "Last evening, mother, we encamped at Hotel Terra Firma." So I took from his diary, from his letters home to his mother, and made a sign. We have a Chateau Bow Wow for a while, a wine cellar, all done in, and Mike Peaches the Malice Palace. Well, he spells it Milice Palice, because he goes, "Ma and Pa lice make more lice."
So I'm going to call the evening to a halt. Actually, not to a halt, because I want folks to come up here and take a look at the items up close. And actually, from the battle, the area around Normandy, Tennessee, there's a map up here. And we also have goodies outside. And thank you, Mark. Thank you, Peter. And thank you, Duane.